We've been studying a sugya called Dichui Mitzvot, and there's a suffix. Is there such a thing as Dichui Mitzvot or not? Do things get knocked off base completely, or can there be a situation where a mitzvah is suspended and comes back to the foreground afterward? It comes back, sort of reanimates itself. And the reason why this sugya matters, I hope you realize it matters in its own right because it's Torah. The limud on tzrichim, we have to learn Torah because it's out there, and it's sort of the idea of amelut b'Torah from our upcoming parsha and Shavua of Imechukotai Telech Shetiu Amelim b'Torah means to apply one's intellectual acumen and not just to coast along with the acquisition of information, which is important in its own right. That's also learning, but also to dive deep. The diving deep, though it feels pressureful, I want to be mechazik everyone, is actually part and parcel of what it means to learn, to understand conceptually what's gone on and what goes on in terms of the world of Torah. So the world of Dichui, the concept of Dichui is the question of the override of a mitzvah because of an outside circumstance or some inherent circumstance about the object. Can that be lifted or not? Now, I'm tabling a question that I was asked in the street on Shabbos that Mark raised. I met him in the street. We said to Shabbos to each other. And right, he was asking me, well, is the issue of Dichui really chefza oriented? Is it object oriented? Is it really on the person, on the gavra, and its relation to it? We're going to see something tonight in the Torah that we had been learning in the Harei Kedem, which is just a writing down of the notes from Rav Soloveitchik from the shiurim that he gave on various topics related to holidays in general. There's a third volume that just came out about Masechet Shabbat, but generally, let's say that the first two volumes are about all the Yamim Tovim. Excellent 2-volume set, highly recommended. Some of it, though, is very hard to understand if you're not holding in the sugya. This is an example of it. If you're not holding in the sugya what's going on with Dichui, you would open in the Sefer. I don't know what this is about. Hopefully, already on this call, we've been with it already a few weeks. We have the basic groundwork. It's page 33a and 33b. We learned that already in the Gemara, and now we're sort of diving in to understand a little bit better. When we left off last time, we were talking about the question of, or the concept of, whether or not a mitzvah object exists in advance of the moment of the fulfillment of the mitzvah. That was right here. First, we talked about trying to figure out what the question was. Biur ha'ibaya b'dichui etzel mitzvot. And in this early first section here, we were asking, wait a second, in the world of korbanot, there's an object. The object, before it's offered, has to be mukdash. You are makdish. It means that it has an inherent sanctitude, a status. It is for sure a chefza shel mitzvah. But is it true that an object which is not a korban, consecrated to belong to the temple treasury, to be offered as a korban, is that also something that can have a status as being a chefza shel mitzvah before you did the mitzvah with it? Does it have some like inherent object status? After all, the Rav pointed out, it's just hadassim. They're myrtle branches. You can find them at the botanical gardens or in your garden. That didn't make it an object of mitzvah just because it's there. There's some designation that's going on. And we normally say that just your verbal assent when it comes to a korban, that does work. But your verbal declaration when it comes to a mitzvah object, that's not clear that that works at all. You have to do something active. So we started to try to understand a little bit deeper based on the approach of Rashi, that perhaps the way Rashi had formulated it almost cryptically was the idea that Rashi said there was something about the making of an eged, the creation of the eged, in order, that the eged was made before Yom Tov, and then the top of the hadas was lopped off, and then Yom Tov started, and then came back the tamra, the little nub grew on top, and that closed it up. So Rashi, here we were trying to understand, wait a minute, why is Rashi, in Rashi, it used the expression, the dichui is that specifically after an igud was made. But we said that's only true for Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says it is essential that you tie the bundle in order to have a bundle called the bundle of the Hoshana bundle, the Lulav bundle, some call it. That has to be extant as a mitzvah object to build it, just like you have to make your sukkah, you have to make that. The Rabbanan disagreed. What we saw here, and I want to read through every line again, obviously, that the point is that perhaps even according to the Rabbanan, there is a concept of making a mitzvah object beforehand, even if it's not essential. Nonetheless, we saw in the Gemara in 33b, they said, yeah, it's a mitzvah la'ogdo. So mitzvah la'ogdo didn't mean it's essential. It meant you should do it. Why? If a person did that, before Yom Tov, then they signaled now that they have a mitzvah object, and that mitzvah object would be subject to possibility of dichui. And there isn't an easy answer. That's the exact question. Once there was a kosher object before Yom Tov, then Yom Tov started, and it was not kosher when Yom Tov started, the minute Yom Tov started, but it became kosher again. Can that be resuscitated? Can it be rejuvenated by the fact that it grew? But the Rav basically had concluded that even according to the Rabbanan, he wrote it down here. Yesh chalot eged belulav midoraita gam l'Rabbanan. But the chalot is not ma'akevet. The status is not essential, and the mitzvah is really of hidur mitzvah. But the fact that you have now a status of an object that was made, as opposed to disparate parts that you're just going to scoop up the morning of, then you have an object, and that object is subject to the possibility of dichui if something happens to it. And then the question, which the Gemara does not truly resolve, even on 33b, is there dichui etzel mitzvot? Is there not dichui etzel mitzvot? We were giving different examples where it might be, might not be. Remember, the first main example was about kisui hadam, where the blood gets covered and uncovered by the wind. But we were saying, is that really comparable necessarily? And it wasn't clear that it was comparable at all. The Gemara really ended up throwing its hands up. Another example was, what if you have black berries? So the blackened berries, which are growing on the sides of the hadassah, if you pick them off, so now you have the right color, everything looks good. Is that the same thing as nektam rosho, where the top was lopped off and the object was kosher, not kosher, and now became kosher? That's the same thing as they were originally black berries on it, and then you fixed it or made it kosher by removing them. That was what the Gemara was discussing at 33b. I made this little arrow handily at the end of the shir last week because that's what we were up to. I hope this is helpful for people. The Rav, in his towering genius, had a very, I think, a lucid way of formulating these concepts and showing us a new layer of the Gemara. And within Rashi, etc., that quite frankly, you see the grandeur of the Rav on display. It's a good example of him going through and analyzing, why did Rashi use this language, not that language, all in consonance with the tradition that he had from his father, his grandfather, etc. But he took it to another level. So the question is like this. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the very fact that you make the eged, and it doesn't matter that Yom Tov started. Remember, for the Rabbanan we talked about, forgot to mention this before, it's like you made the bundle, but then Yom Tov started. That's when the lights go on, because then you showed, I prepared it right in advance of Yom Tov. But Rabbi Yehuda holds that inherently the object needs to be made, and it doesn't have to do with Yom Tov per se. And so the Rav asked, Ha'im gam im ya'agod lulav b'Chanukah yeshayach bo psul dichui? Let's say you tied it on Chanukah, almost a year in advance. We learned that the sukkah is going to be kosher, the stama lishma. If it's within 30 and you just built a sukkah, the assumption is it's within the time frame that you're going to make a sukkah. But Beit Shammai held that if it's before 30 days, aval kodem shloshim yom, imas olashim chag, havale sukkah lishma gam kodem shloshim. If you built it in February, you built a sukkah, and you said, I'm building a sukkah for the mitzvah of sukkah, Beit Shammai says that would be a good sukkah when sukkah comes along. V'im kain, according to that logic, says the Rav, yesh lomar dechol she'agdol l'shem lulav shal mitzvah, according to Rabbi Yehuda at least, as long as you tied it for the sake of a lulav shal mitzvah, shayach dichui afilu b'lulav haneged b'Chanukah l'shem mitzvat lulav, because you made the object and you had in mind, this is when the holiday comes, I will use the object for that purpose. However, the Rav said there's a fly in the ointment, which is that further along, Achiyuan lahalon and Daf Mem Vav Medalef, we didn't get there yet. You should make a brach when you make your lulav. Nobody holds this way lamaisa, but it's a day in the Gemara. And Rashi there, what did he write? The Pirush Rashi Sham ha'osa lulav be'erev Yom Tov. See where he wrote those words be'erev Yom Tov? Has to be somewhere in the zone of erev Yom Tov. It can't be 3 months before. Larry, I see your hand. Give me half a sec. Finish the paragraph. V'nirmi Rashi. It seems from Rashi there's no such thing as a real asiyah, making the mitzvah object, and the eged for the sake of the mitzvah, except it's erev yantiv. V'rak samuch l'chag, only close to the holiday's onset. Then you could call it cheftzis shalulav. That's according to Rashi. Maybe it doesn't become a cheftzis mitzvah, even according to the Rabbi Yehuda, unless it is actually erev yantiv per se. Okay, Larry, go ahead. I can't hear you. Did you unmute? Okay, go ahead.
You're pretty demanding. I have to unmute too. Do we have a definition of what constitutes an eged?
Yes, it is the bundling of the lulav, hadassim, and a ravot together.
What constitutes the bundling?
Tying it in a knot with some kind of substance, which we try to make sure is actually made of the same material as lulav, so there won't be a Baal Tosif problem according to any opinion.
Okay, I'll stop here.
I didn't answer the question that was asked last week. That's until we get to etrog. Why isn't etrog in the bundle? Like, how did that happen? Is there some reason it can't? I mean, it'll be cumbersome to fit it in. Big deal. It's cumbersome to eat so much matzah, but I have to do it. It's a mitzvah. You know what I mean? So if it was a mitzvah, I have to do it. And somehow the etrog is accepted. Why is that? We'll have to get back to that.
You arranged we could eat an etrog instead of all the matzah?
These are not powers that are given to me. Sorry. Moving right along. The Rav explains as follows. End of this section as follows. Umid ba'er li dvarenu. It is explained according to what we're saying. Lo shayach dichui ela b'chaftzah shel mitzvah. The concept of dichui, of override of something, obtains only for an object of mitzvah. That's what we keep seeing again and again. V'tzarech biur. But we're going to have to explain lefiza according to this logic. Gabe kisur hadam. When the case of kisur hadam, the shakli v'tare, there was a question back and forth, questions and answers, a Q&A. But Gemara abei b'dichui eitzel mitzvah be'ofen shekisau haruach v'chazer v'nidgalah. Remember, that was the whole question, right? We said if it got covered by someone, then it's done. So if it got uncovered afterward, the mitzvah is done, it's finished. But if the wind covered it and uncovered it, sounds like you still have to do the mitzvah of kisur hadam. So the ha'atam lo chala dichui klal b'dam. We said there with regard to the wind, there's no dichui on the dam. But didn't we say the whole issue of dichui is probably vested in the object? Ela sheniftar hagavra v'nidcha b'mitzvato yedei shekisau haruach u'maz shayach ladin dichui etzel mitzvot. What had happened in the case of kisur hadam? It was a case where the wind had covered it and uncovered it, and there we were saying the fellow had to recover it again. Okay, so that's not dichui etzel mitzvot of an object. That is, the person was not able to do the mitzvah because no mitzvah to be done now. It was covered. But it wasn't a psul on the object. The blood is not a chafetz shel mitzvah. It's blood. So you're not sanctifying, we're going to do a mitzvah with this object. The mitzvah is to cover the blood, right? Ubal korchenu, sorry. Ubal korchenu tzarich lomar dekisau haruach ein ze rak p'tur al gavra mechovat mitzvah kisur hadam. We have to therefore say that when the wind covers it, it is only a p'tur on the gavra from the chova of kisur hadam. Ella zeu hafka b'dam atzmo de'etzem adam enu nechshav od l'dam haroy l'kisui. We can't say though that it is just a thing on the man, but rather it has to be something about the object, because the object came back. Meaning it must be that we've uprooted the blood itself. The blood is no longer considered dam, which is appropriate for kisui. It's not a cheftzah shel mitzvah really, but it's on the way. Al kain havale hafka beguf cheftzah shel mitzvah. There's something. It must be that the object is suspended. And therefore that must be the comparison. The Rav says, look, if the issue is that the individual, from a person perspective, this is Mark's question to me on Shabbos, according to the Rav, if you want to say that kisur hadam is really about the person, I can't do the mitzvah right now because of the covering of the blood, fine. The problem is the blood got uncovered again. And now the mitzvah came right back. But if there was dichui etzel mitzvah, the fact that it was covered, so then I don't have a mitzvah anymore on me. But you see that the fact that the object was unavailable and became available again, that's the comparison to Nektam Rosho. The object was available, not available, available. So at the moment when it became available again, so the chefza, the problem is we mean chefza shel mitzvah in two different ways, right? The chefza shel mitzvah on the of the bundle, it's like an object that is according to Rabbi Yehuda and even according to the Rabbanan. You made it. How did the blood get there? You did shchit and the blood came out. You have to cover the blood. You're doing an action to the object, but it's not like you're lifting it up or something. Yeah, you're just covering it. In the case of Nektam Rosho, so you made the object, something happened to it, and now it got back to its previous state. Those who want to make the comparison, says the Rav, have to admit that Kisui Hadam must also somehow be a case, oddly enough, of Chefza Shal Mitzvah, even though it's a strange comparison, since the Chefza Shal Mitzvah is not exactly a one-to-one comparison between these two contexts. Yeah. Let me pause here before we go to the next section. There's two more sections left. You have Daled and Hey, and then we're going to go, if there's time. I still want to see Tosafot. Everybody with me so far, or did I lose you? Let me pause station identification. I lost you? You're with me. Good. Okay. Yes. Good. Anybody else who's not with their screen off or looking like they're frozen? Okay. So everybody's with the program. Yes. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Next section, related section. We learned in a previous sugya a whole thing about a lulav avodah zara. I learned a bunch of different gemaras with you, and some people I'm sure were thinking, like, we were looking up that gemara, but I had in mind already. We're going to come back to this. What happens if a person bows down to a tree, and then the tree is a palm tree, and you cut off the parts, and now you're going to use it for your lulav? So is that permissible? Is it not permissible? So we had a whole discussion. The Gemara was going back and forth. Maybe you could say that the object, once it was mitbatel, meaning the non-Jew worshipped it, and then the non-Jew said, I nullify the idolatry here, and chop the tree apart and give you for pieces for the mitzvah. Can you use it? So we said you probably could use it, but it's kind of degrading. This object was just used for such a nefarious purpose. Can you really just, like on a spin of a dime, say, okay, now it's kosher, and now I'm going to use it? But really, you can't say it's still an object of avodah zarah. It was mitbatel. The question is, how does that work in terms of the dichui with a lulav shel avodah zarah? And now here we have sort of a crossover, the previous sugya and this sugya, from a gemara that we learned together. We looked this up in Masechet Avodah Zarah, Mem Zayin. Ulam beikar mashenemar dechalot dichui. Let me zoom in here. What we said, that the onset of dichui, of the override, who rak mishenegad, only once it was tied, ubetalush, once it was disconnected from the ground. Obviously, if you made it to a bundle, it's not like it's still attached to the ground. Kimavur berashi hana anizkar le'el, which we learned before. That's the Rashi you have in front of you, Lama Gimel Amud Aleph. Tzarachin begemara rucha be'avodah zarah. We have a direct, a laid out gemara, an arranged gemara in avodah zarah. It says so very obviously. Gabe baya de Reish Lakish. The question asked by Reish Lakish: Hamishtach ledekel. Someone bows down to a palm tree. Lulav u'ma'u mitzvah. Can you use the lulav for a mitzvah after? It's still attached to the ground when it was worshipped, yeah? So ki'ata rav dimi amar ba'ashera shebetela kamabayale. We're talking about a case where it was an ashera tree that was actually nullified. That's the question. Because therefore the question is, yesh dichui etzel mitzvot or ein dichui etzel mitzvot? That's what we're wondering. Is there or is there not dichui in that instance? I and Sham see that Gemara, also a back and forth. And that case was a case where it was attached to the ground still, and it wasn't tied in any bundle. There was already a discussion about dichui, but there was no chefta shel mitzvah. It was still attached to the ground. So why was there a discussion there about dichui etzel mitzvot? There could be a discussion about a dichui etzel mitzvah with an object that is not yet designated for a mitzvah. Hasn't been, when I say designated, I don't mean with your mouth. That's only kodshim. But designated, because we say hazman alav milta, but designated through an action, the tying of it together, it's still a part of the tree. Yet the Gemara there didn't spare any expense to ask the question, yesh dichui etzel mitzvot or ein dichui etzel mitzvot? Why is it asking it? It's obvious that it doesn't obtain. There's no mitzvah object. So the Rav said as follows: Venira de shiny din dichui de hatam. That was a different element of dichui. The yesod midin ma'us lamitzvot. The issue there, even though it was using the language of Dichui, the Gemara there was also discussing something that is abominable now to be used. It's disgusting to use it, repulsive. To use it as a mitzvah. Uvadin zeh gam kodem shechal al halulav shem lulav shal mitzvah sheyachalot shal ma'us lemitzvah. So the Rav says, in addition, there could be the lulav that has a shame, a status of a lulav of mitzvah. There's still an idea that some object could become despicable or repulsive to be used as a mitzvah. Ma she'ein kain b'din nektam rosho. When it got lopped off from the top, lo shayach psul v'chalot shem nektam atolu b'dinei hadar, ela b'lulav shal mitzvah. That issue, when the top is missing, is an issue that is connected not to the din of hadar or anything like that, or that's disgusting. It's just that it's no longer considered lulav shal mitzvah because it's missing a part of it, of itself. When it's attached to the ground, there's no way that's a chefzer shel mitzvah. Because you can't take it, you can't lift it up when it's still attached to the ground. Aval shem ma'us shayach be'ikar hadavar de'enu ra'ui od lemitzvah. Yeah. Rabbi Shurkin here points out and does not answer the question, so it's open season. Anyone wants to try to answer it. I did not find an answer. Rabbi Shurkin points out when you look up the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, one of the answers that was given as a comparison with this dekel, this palm tree, is the case of Kisui Hadam. So that was a case that in our Gemara we wanted to use as comparable because it's somehow related to being a chefzer shel mitzvah. The best I could come up with, and I'm sure it's easy to shoot it down, I just haven't figured out how, but I'm sure there's an easy way to shoot it down, is that the Kisui Hadam is the, how shall I say, it's exhibit A being brought into the courtroom for one context and the other context, and it's not a one-to-one analogy to either of them. In the case of the Kisui Hadam comparison to Nektam Rosho, so it's kind of like the Rav says, kind of related to a chefzer shel mitzvah, but in the case of the lulav, you made a bundle, you did something. The Kisui Hadam, the result of the shechita is the blood came out. You didn't make it, it just happened. In the case of the dekel, the opposite side, it's not a mitzvah object at all. No one made it into anything. And the Kisui Hadam is a little bit of a mitzvah object. Why? I didn't make it with my hands. I shechted the animal. It caused the blood to come out. So it might be more in an indirect way, but there was some input. And the dekel, the object is still attached to the tree, for heaven's sake. It's not an object that's separate from the ground. It's still kashur la'adama. And maybe that's the distinction. Maybe that's the answer to Rabbi Shurkin's question. You know, the Rav didn't engage it. How come? What about the fact that Kisui Hadam Exhibit A appears in two contexts? I think the answer, is that Kisui Hadam is being brought into both courtrooms, so to speak, to use the analogy, even though in neither case is Exhibit A actually a one-to-one relationship. There's something that's missing on either side. That could be. I don't know. Okay, let me pause here again. Everybody still with me? Go to the last piece. I hope this is bringing us to greater understanding of like what some of the mechanics are. It's sort of the culminating shear. After this, we got to move to the next sugya, but just to understand some of this inside, to see it on a deeper level. So the last piece goes like this. The question is, and this by the way, we'll have the time, is going to be a segue, if I'm lucky, into Tosafot on Lamed Gimel Aleph that I've talked about now like 5 times, because he's going to reference Tosafot on Lamed Gimel Aleph, and it'll be, he's going to give away a part of Tosafot. It's fine. Let's see what he says. Dichui MeIkara etzem mitzvot. V'hinei beGemara lahol Lamed Gimel Amud Bet maskan haGemara lechalek ben Dichui MeIkara debevaded lo have Dichui. And Lamed Gimel Amud Bet, the Gemara concludes that if something was never going to be worthy and you made it worthy, that's fine. And that's not the same thing as nira v'nidcha, which is a question that is simply not answered. It's left really open-ended. We're not sure. This is what the Gemara said in Lamed Gimel Amud Bet. La'olam de'ashchur me'ikara dichui me'ikara lo have dichui tifshot mina aval nira v'nidcha choze v'nira lo tifshot. Really, the idea that there was initially, when you cut the hadassim off the ground, there were too many black berries on it. So that dichui, the fact that it's not kosher, and you made it kosher by picking off the black berries, so that's not dichui anymore. It was Dichui MeIkara means it started no good, but you made it good. Fine. Don't extrapolate from that a case where it started fine went down a notch to being not fine, and then you fixed it again. Those are not the same thing. So that was what the Gemara had said. Yeah. Now, v'hinei legabe kodshim, but when it comes to korbanot, amru b'gemara b'kam mekomot Dichui MeIkara have dichui. Yet in the world of kodshim, in several places, the Gemara makes clear that if something was initially disqualified from its inception, from the moment that it was mukdash to be actually serving as a korban, that is automatically a disqualifier for all time. Cannot be fixed. There's nothing you can do about it. So once we say that, that's the case. Namely, that it's a what's the word? It's pushed off from being able to be used on the korban side. It's unfixable, right? It's irrevocable. Okay. Says, but wait a second. Katva Tosafot wrote in the Dibur Matchil Nektam Alzeh, V'nehi degabe Kodshim. It's clear that with regard to Kodshim, in that circumstance, Pshitalan de Dichui MeIkara have a Dichui. It's for sure that that's the case. He gives an example. Tosafot gives an example. We'll see this inside if we have time. Gabe mafrish nekeva lepischo beperak mishahayatame. In Gemara Pesachim it says that if someone took their lamb, and the lamb was a female, and they said this is going to be my korban pesach, that is actually not a kosher korban pesach, but it still was considered now part of hekdesh because someone designated it. You're stuck. What's that case? A person, two people share ownership in an animal, and one of them says, "I'm makdish my portion." The other guy wasn't makdish. So now you have an animal that is both part of hekdesh and part chulin. So even if the second guy comes around after and he says, "Oh, you know what? I decided to be makdish as well," it's too late. The second that an animal was half in, half out, or the second you designated this female sheep to serve as your korban pesach, out. Out means it can't be used. That's called Dichui MeIkara. Yet it has a status of hekdesh because you designated it as such. What do you do with it? So the Gemara describes you whatever it is. You wait till it gets a blemish. You sell it. There's all the and then you take the proceeds. You give that to the bedek habayit, whatever it is. So these cases, right? Gabe mitzvah ibaylan. So really, the question about Dichui MeIkara is really about mitzvahs in general. The Tosafot asked that, but they say in Kodshim it's pretty obvious. The Gemara in Lamed Gimel Amud Bet made clear that really Dichui MeIkara does not obtain for mitzvot. Tosafot seemed to be asking about this, or saying that the Gemara at least is considering the question. The question is resolved that the Dichui MeIkara is not Dichui when it comes to mitzvot, even though it is true for Kodshim. So the Rav writes, "V'nimtze lefizeh tehachtim abayalan bedin Dichui MeIkara hainu nami b'mitzvot." The fact that there is any question about Dichui MeIkara, that means also in the world of mitzvot. Ava b'korban b'chol ofen yesh Dichui bein MeIkara bein b'nira v'chozer v'nira. Regard to korbanot, that's from the outset, but tzarich biur. But we have to understand this better. The intern salomar she'ikar din Dichui shayach gam mitzvot. If we hold that the principle that a mitzvah could be overridden exists in some way in the world of mitzvot, ma shayach od l'chalek ben mitzvot lekorbanot le'inin Dichui MeIkara. Why is there? Why should there be a distinction between Kodshim over here and mitzvot over there? Ha safek zeh hu safek behilchot Dichui. The safek is about the concept of Dichui. V'lo tali bekorban v'lo mitzvot klal. The Rav basically questioned, why is there a discussion on and on about Kodshim? Everybody agrees it's Dichui MeIkara. Mitzvahs, that's a discussion. It's not a discussion of one magisterium versus the other. Maybe the discussion is just, is there such thing as Dichui MeIkara or not? And we find that in korbanot there is Dichui MeIkara. So why don't you just say there's Dichui MeIkara also with regard to the world of mitzvot, that there was a circumstance where it wasn't kosher. Now, again, the Gemara eventually comes to the conclusion, no, if there were blackberries and you picked them off, so you fixed it. But listen to what the Rav explains sort of in the process of this. V'nira al pia mavur, but based on what we're explaining, here's really what's probably going on. On account of the fact that there is a concept of Dichui Mitzvot sometimes, right? The Gemara leaves it open-ended, but it sounds like there is Dichui Mitzvot if it was kosher, not kosher, kosher again, at least a discussion. In Ken Yesh Lomar the Chozeh Shayach Rak Benira V'Nidcha. It sounds like we could say that whole discussion is only when it was good, not good, good. The Chal Kvar Al Hoshana Shem Shel Hoshana Shel Mitzvah, because it started off at some point. It had the status. It was called an object called the Hoshana of Mitzvah. Aval B'chihai Gavna Shehu Dichui MeIkara. But in our case, meaning the case of Korbanot of Kodshim, where there's Dichui initially, in Kemel Chatchila Ein Ze Omed LaMitzvah V'lo Chal Alav Shem Shel Chepta Shel Mitzvah. But in the case where there was Dichui MeIkara, sorry, not in Kodshim, in the Mitzvah, let's say you made a bundle, and already from the outset, when you made the bundle, the top of the hadassim were missing. So you can't say the Chetz Shel Mitzvah was damaged. There was no Chetz Shel Mitzvah here. There's no psul dichui in this object because there's no status that conferred on the object whatsoever. We have here hadassim, a rav, and a lulav, but it's not really a bundle. The concept of dichui can only happen if there was an object that was actually enacted or effected rather by my action. Made a chatz shel mitzvah. Dichui MeIkara hadichui atzmo mafkia shem chatz shel mitzvah lechatchila. The concept of dichui MeIkara means that it has uprooted the object of mitzvah ab initio. But we don't have an object when we talk about a mitzvah. But with korbanot, even if the korban is not good from its inception, meaning a man took a sheep out of his pen and he said, "This, you are going to be my korban Pesach." And then he looked in its undercarriage and realized it's a female. Okay, it can't be used for the mitzvah. And there was Dichui MeIkara. However, the fact that a man said, "I make you to the animal. This animal will be my korban." Mikol makam kedushat korban alav. The kedusha of a korban fell on this object. Umikoch kedushat korban atzma v'chefs shel korban. V'shayat bo dechia be'etzem hakedusha korban af shelo haya ra'ui la'akrav ma'olam. Meaning, the fact that you can't use it is standing on the side of the fact that it still was designated for the realm of Hekdesh. When you said about your sheep, this sheep is going to be the Korban Pesach, what you really meant to say is, I am hereby makdish this sheep to be part of Hekdesh, and what I intend to do with it is to makdish it as a Korban Pesach. The halacha says to you, but it's a female, that can't be a Korban Pesach. So that part of your statement is lopped off, and this animal is now not, it's Dichui MeIkara. You can't change his designation now and say, "Oh, I want to give it for making a shlamim." Can't do that. Too late. You declared what it should be. That's too bad. But it also can't go back in the pen because inherent in the statement that I'm makdish this object to give it as a korban Pesach, in our example, easy low-hanging fruit example is recent, means that status was conferred on it because in the realm of Kodshim, everything gets bumped up a notch in terms of how significant your statement, your input, your involvement is in the process of making an object status change. Follow? Yehuda, please.
I still have some trouble with Kisui Adam because there you have a function as the mitzvah. It's not an object, not heftzah shel mitzvah. Is it to be ignored?
No. Because Rabbi Soloveitchik was basically saying the fact that I am responsible to do the mitzvah Kisui Adam, the wind covered the dam, and then uncovered the dam, and now I have to do Kisui Adam, teaches me that it must be something with the chefza and not with the gavra. That's what he wanted to argue. But I think he was basically conceding, as you're saying, it's not exactly a one-to-one relationship. Since we all agree, you took three disparate objects and you designated them by tying them together. That's not the same thing as the blood came pouring out.
Yeah.
So, but that was what the Rav basically wanted to argue because he was trying to wrap his head around. How could it be that you have, what's the relation to the object? It's an object-based halacha, dichui, not a person-based halacha. It was a person-based halacha, by the way. So the fact that the wind covered the object you have to uncover the object because you didn't do it. It's on you. But no, the halacha says if the wind covered the blood, so now you don't have to cover. Why? There's no object here. My responsibility is really that with regard to the object not devolving on me absent the object. You don't have to run around looking for a dam to cover. It's only if it happens because you did shechita.
Okay.
Is everyone with me, or did I lose you, or what are we up to? I need like a sign, not including people whose screens are off. Unless you want to give me a thumbs up or something.
My
Getting a
logic,
smile. That's good.
in my logic, it doesn't chive with the other examples of lulav and
That was what I was trying to,
yeah.
as they say, the base medrash, touch up Rabbi Shurkin's question on the Rav, that he said that in the case of the lulav shel asher, not lulav shel, well, the dekel shel asher, a guy's bound down to the tree, and then and then if there's bittul, then if he cuts it off, and he could use it, except it's disgusting. It's most mitzvah. So Rabbi Shurkin threw in, but kisu adam is an example there also. I'm imagining kisu adam. It's not a perfect analogy. It's being marshaled by two different cases because it approximates each, but it's not a perfect fit. It doesn't seem to be a perfect fit, not to me at least. I don't know, maybe someone else. Okay, it's now at the 38-minute mark. Do I dare to do a Tosafot that's going to actually take us way longer than 15 minutes? That wouldn't be so smart. Can I give you the Cliff's Notes edition of Tosafot? Would that be okay?
Sure.
The Cliff's Notes edition of Tosafot. Okay, because there's a lot of explaining to do. We saw part of the punchline already in the in what the Rav wrote. He quoted Tosafot. The Rav gave examples. Tosafot comes to marshal examples where actually there seem to be exceptions to this rule in the world of Kodshim, where Dichui MeIkara is not really Dichui, and only Nira and Venidcha would be Dichui, and when there would be cases maybe of even Nira Venidcha, and that's not be considered Dichui. So he gave a few examples of what these are. We actually learned at the beginning of this Tosafot already, where it said, and there's a little problem in Tosafot, because Tosafot say that in Rashi it mentions only Nira Venidcha, but the truth is the Maharam pointed out that Tosafot did not have the entire Rashi in front of them, because Rashi actually in Lamed Gimel Aleph and the Dibur Matchil Nektam, he'd said himself that actually it's not clear whether it's Dichui MeIkara or Nira Venidcha, but Tosafot assume that Rashi is only talking about Nira Venidcha. Afal pi shebakuntris hizkir Nira Venidcha hadahacha Dichui MeIkarahu, right? Akevan b'tchilat Yom Tov lo chazi. This must be a case of Dichui MeIkara, since when Yom Tov started, this object was not good. Remember, because the top was lopped off when you lit the Yom Tov candles. But just to remind you that actually, as we saw in the Rav, the Rav used the whole Rashi, which Tosafot didn't apparently have, according to the Maharam, in order to show there is a mitzvah object before Yom Tov. And when Yom Tov starts, according to the Rabbanan, that's when the lights get turned on. It turns out when Yom Tov started, it wasn't good, but there was a dichui, there was an object that existed before, an object of mitzvah. For Rabbi Yehuda, all the more so, it has nothing to do with the onset of Yom Tov. As soon as you made the object of a mitzvah object, then something happened to it. So it's Nira Venidcha, and then it grew the Tamra, and then it's Nira again on the next morning. Give me one more second, Aaron. Let me just this one line. So Bali Tosafot didn't see that, because they didn't see that in Rashi. So they say, well, wait a second, look further along in Ashram Erev Yom Tov, which is on Lamed Gimel Bet. If the Hadass had more of these black looking berries on it, so they're posel the Hadass. So when you pick it off on Erev Yom Tov, excuse me, it turned black on Erev Yom Tov. So then when you picked it, so that was Dichui MeIkara, and then you would have fixed it on Yom Tov, and that would be okay. Wait, Ari, you want to ask? Go.
I just wanted to ask. So Tosfot is not saying Nira Benitcha. Only Rashi is, or they're both saying that.
If you look at what Tosfot says, Rashi is saying. Tosfot seems to be missing a line that we have in Rashi. Rashi says the Gemara has not specified if this case on Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph is a case of Dichui MeIkara or whether it's a case of Nira V'nidcha.
Okay.
Tosfot say, oh, Rashi, you think that this is only here a case of Nira V'nidcha, right? But wait a minute, it really is Dichui MeIkara, because look on the next page where it mentions that when Yontif started, if you had too many black berries and you picked them off, you could fix it. That's Dichui MeIkara. And you're claiming that it's only a case of Nir V'nidcha, but you see that later on in 33b, the Gemara did marshal an example of Dichui MeIkara and that it could be fixed. But the supposition of Tosfot is that Rashi voted that on Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph, we're only talking about a case of Nir V'nidcha. But our version of Rashi has, from the manuscript made into the Ram Shas, our version has, and at this moment in the Gemara, we don't know if it's Dichui MeIkara or whether it's Nir V'nidcha. The Rav said, how could it be Nir V'nidcha? It could be Nir V'nidcha if there's a mitzvah object before Yontif began, and the onset of Yontif, according to Rabbanan, caused it. According to Rabbi Yehuda, even without it, the fact that you have a Chatzah Shal mitzvah. Anyway, the Gemara, what goes on further along in Tosfot is to marshal some examples that seem to be exceptional cases. I don't know how to parse them without spending all the time. There was no way I could do it in 2.5, 3 minutes, and I'm more exhausted than I thought. So maybe I can cut my losses here, as it turns out. We learned just a little bit of Tosfot after all. Okay, for another time. At least we made a foray into the world of Rav Soloveitchik, his analysis of Rashi, what he brought to bear, and in terms of a conceptual understanding of the mitzvah, or the element of Dichui. Next time we learn, which will be, God willing, next Monday at 8:30, we will be moving on in the Gemara to the next section. So if you got lost somewhere in the deep dive, fear not. We're picking up stakes and we're making headway. We'll pick it up with the story of the Arava, God willing, next week. Ad Khan for tonight. Nice to see everybody. One and all. See you soon.